Let's talk about volunteer retention. This is an area of church leadership that a lot of pastors are managing, but not actually solving. And I think the reason it stays unsolved is because the diagnosis is wrong just from the start. Now, before you check out because you think you've heard this before, I want to promise you that what I'm about to say is probably not what you've heard or been taught. Because most of what gets taught on this topic is aimed at the wrong problem. So let's start there. Let's start with the problem. Here's how volunteer loss usually happens in a church. It doesn't come with big resignations or announcements. There's no usually difficult conversation, no formal exit, no real moment you can even point to. Someone just starts missing, Sunday once, and then twice, and then a month is gone and you realize that you haven't really seen or heard from them, and when you think about it, neither has anyone else on your team. That's the pattern, and it's worth paying close attention to because buried in that pattern is the actual diagnosis. It's not that they left, it's that it took this long for anyone to notice that they haven't shown up. Now, here's where most churches go wrong. The default response to kind of volunteer drift is it's an appreciation strategy. You thank people more publicly, you host a volunteer dinner, you hand out gift cards, you write personal notes, and you make sure people feel seen. And I am not saying that any of that is bad. We probably should do those things, right? However, and it's good pastoral instinct to do those things, but it doesn't fix the problem. Because the problem isn't that people feel unappreciated. The problem is that they stopped feeling necessary. Let me say that again. Here's the diagnosis, here's the problem. Volunteer retention struggles happen not because people feel unappreciated, it's because volunteers realize they don't feel necessary. And those two are completely different diagnoses, which would have completely different solutions. Let me explain what I mean for a minute. When a volunteer can miss a Sunday and the service runs fine, and no one reaches out, and no one felt a gap, they've just discovered something about their role. They've discovered it doesn't cost anything to not show up. And once they know that, the calculus starts to shift, right? Showing up goes from expected to optional. And optional eventually becomes inconsistent. And inconsistent becomes absent. And then you never had a hard conversation about any of it. That's what I would call a role design problem. And most churches are just running it at scale without even realizing it. If I could just really quick, most of you know that I was a lead pastor for 13 years. I've been in ministry now for 21 years, but 13 of those years as a lead pastor. And during my early late lead pastor tenure, I took over a revitalization opportunity in a church, and it was so fantastic. And we had lots of needs, financial needs, all sorts. And of course, we had volunteer needs. In that volunteer need space, as we began to grow, the need got more and more and more. But the momentum of the growth and the energy around more people showing up and all of that was so fun and so fantastic. Our volunteers were showing up and they really felt that if they, didn't show up, the church would not run today. If they weren't there, no one was just going to fill in the gap. I mean, there was real, and the word we used was ownership. They really felt ownership over their role. And I say this just to help understand what happened. We grew in a portable school and then into a semi-portable school. We reached about 5,000 people on a Sunday morning in a portable situation. It was chaos, but as you can imagine in that chaos, it was beautiful because all of these volunteers really did feel necessary. We built a big building, which was awesome. It was very exciting, 180,000 square feet. We moved into the building. You have a lot of people in the beginning that show up, just the looky-loos, but we settled back around 7,000 to 8,000 people every week, which required more volunteers. And it didn't take long for us to feel that those volunteers weren't as committed. And I'll tell you why. It's because serving got a lot easier. More people to fill in, more people that honestly just didn't feel as necessary. That's so easy for that to happen. Now, with all of that in mind, right, and your situation in mind, let's kind of add something here. And I didn't really go deep on this in the blog today, but let's kind of, I think it matters to how we think about this structurally. The design problem, right, that we're talking about usually starts upstream from the role itself. It starts not after the role is filled, it starts when the role gets filled. This is actually a recruiting conversation more than a retention conversation. It's both, but it starts at the recruiting level. Most volunteer recruitment goes something like this, right? You have a need, you make the announcement, someone responds, you put them in the slot, you're grateful, they're willing, and then you move on. What didn't happen in that sequence is any intentional design of what the role requires relationally and what outcome is going to be produced visibly. And of course, who specifically this person is connected to when they show up. Think of it this way: you filled the gap, you didn't build the role. You filled the gap, but you didn't build the role. And when you fill gaps instead of building roles, you create a volunteer culture where people are interchangeable. That's a little bit about what we experienced at Woodstock City Church when we moved into our first permanent location, where almost anyone can cover for anyone else, where the system is designed to absorb absence rather than feel it. And listen, you would never say that you just need a warm body in the position, but this is exactly how you treated and filled the position. And listen, that is efficient in the short term. It's a retention disaster over time. So what actually makes a role feel unmissable? Well, I think there are two things, and I wrote about both of these on the post today. But let's kind of I'm going to give you a little bit more texture around each of those for a second. The first is relational weight. Okay, relational weight means that the volunteer is connected to specific people, not to the church in general, right? To specific people. There is a name, there's a face, there is a relationship that has some history to it. When that person is absent, someone notices, not because they didn't check in on a sign-in sheet, but because they were looking for them. That kind of accountability doesn't require enforcement. It really just requires intentional connection and design on the front end. Like, so when you place a volunteer, ask yourself, who does this person belong to in this role? I love this question. Who does this volunteer belong to? Not who do they report to? Who do they belong to? Who will notice when they are gone? If you can't answer that question, the relational architecture isn't built yet. So, relationship, that's the first one. And the second is visible impact. Visible impact means that the volunteer can draw a line clearly between their presence, not the job, not the role, but their presence and real outcome. And it can't be a general sense that they're helping the church's mission in some theoretical way, right? An actual traceable result that they can see. This matters because people stay where they can see what their presence produces. If the role is invisible in its outcome, listen, the person eventually becomes invisible to their commitment. Now, here's why I want to push you a little bit, okay? And this is just to make this very practical. So I don't mean to push too hard, but I want to push a little bit because I think there's a move that just most pastors skip. You can probably diagnose role design problems without rebuilding your entire volunteer system from scratch. You don't have to overhaul everything this week. That would be impossible anyway. But you do have to start somewhere very specific, and here's where you should start. Here's what I would like for you to do, if you can, before this Sunday. I'd love for you to pick maybe up to 3 volunteer roles in your church. Okay, not 20, just pick 3 volunteer roles in your church. And don't pick the highest profile ones, okay? Pick the ones that feel most replaceable. And I don't mean this in any negative way, but parking lot volunteers, ushers, guest services, hospitality team, things that could accidentally fall into that warm body kind of category. So pick the ones that feel most replaceable. The ones where if someone stopped showing up, the team would just adjust and fill in the gap without too much friction. And for each one, I'd love for you to ask two questions. Is this person connected to someone specific who would notice and reach out if they were gone? And not because they missed 6 times, but they were gone 1 time. Is this volunteer role, is this person connected to someone specific who would notice and reach out if they missed today? And then second, right? And again, not a general sense, right? This is very specific relationship. Can this person trace a visible outcome? Second question, can this person trace a visible outcome back to their presence? Not the job, not the role, not the description, but their presence on Sunday. So not just that they served, that something happened because they were there. If both answers are a no for your role, you have a big design problem. If one of those answers is a no, you have an opportunity that can be more easily addressed, right? This isn't a motivation problem, right? This is a design problem. And design problems are fixable, but only if you are diagnosing the problem correctly. I mean, here's kind of the broader issue at stake, in case you're wondering, and I'll just say it as plainly as I can. Volunteer drift accumulates quietly, like any drift, right? It accumulates quietly. By the time you feel it organizationally, it has been building for a very long time. And the instinct, right, is to respond by just recruiting harder, which may fill a gap temporarily, but you just watch the same problem happen over and over again. And the reason is because the design is still broken. The churches that build really strong volunteer cultures are not the ones with the best appreciation strategies. They're the ones who build roles that actually need people and make sure people know it. That is a different kind of leadership work, right? And honestly, it's less visible. It doesn't get applauded as much in a staff meeting, but it's the work that builds a culture where people feel like they belong to something that genuinely needs them. And listen, that kind of culture, it's hard to leave. So this week, again, do the audit, pick those 3 roles, ask the 2 questions, and then start the repair where the design is the weakest. That's really the move for you to take, the first move. Hey, listen, thanks for listening to this too. If this landed for you and you want to, think through the structural design of your volunteer kind of culture in more depth, this is exactly the kind of work I do with pastors. And I do a lot of this inside of something I call leadership labs. It just so happens that I have a leadership lab on volunteering in your church coming up very soon, end of April. Go to gavinadams.com. You can learn a lot more about it there. I'd love for you to join other pastors and churches just like you, like-minded people, so who are looking to solve this, not just temporarily put a Band-Aid on it. And of course, if you have a question that you want to ask me about or tell me what's happening in your church, in your context, just reply to the emails I send out. I read everything that comes back in from people just like you.